Past 9 a.m., so it looks like it is time for us to start. My name is Brandon Rhodes. I lived in Atlanta for a while and was the head of Python Atlanta, the volunteer organizer of Python Atlanta. My wife has gotten a job as a professor in a small town of Northwest Ohio, so I now live in the snow-swept fields. Well, actually not at the moment, but they tell me it's an odd winter. Of Northwest Ohio, and this is the third year of my giving the Sphinx tutorial at PyCon, and it's kind of fun because most other tutorials you're coding Python, and this is kind of a break where you get to kind of code English instead, and it sort of is meta to the extent that this is a tutorial about how to write about Python rather than being primarily about Python itself. It helps me with pacing the tutorial, and it also helps me with knowing what points to emphasize and what points to pass over in a hurry if I kind of know what you guys are here to get out of it. If we could just quickly go around the room, you don't have to identify yourselves, but if you could each sort of say, have you used, and you can just say like yes and no for these first two. Have you used restructured text before? The format or actually I could do that as a poll. Who here has used restructured text at all before? Very nice, but a few who won't, so we'll make sure to hit that. How many of you have ever used Sphinx some before? And with that background, if you could each, I mean, you can pass if you want, but I'd love to hear one or two things that you'd like to come away from this tutorial with, particularly if you've already used Sphinx before.
So I work on a project called OpenStack, which is all Python projects, and we do all of our documentation is our developer documentation is automated through Sphinx and Jenkins. We push our documentation up. But one of the things that's lacking right now is internationalization, localization of the documentation, so I'm interested in that. And also our API docs are in DocBook XML, and a lot of our tech writers would absolutely prefer to write in RST, but they don't feel that there's a lot of tools for doing sort of the table of contents and traditional API doc type of stuff in RST and Sphinx and that kind of tool set. So I'm just interested in that kind of stuff.
All right.
I do a lot of stuff with restructured text, but mostly single documents, and I'm starting to get multiple documents, and I don't know how to do it.
All right.
I inherited some documentation that was written by someone else using Autodoc and kind of pasting things together piecemeal. So I'm just trying to get a picture of how to improve the Autodoc stuff and kind of make it more consistent throughout.
Okay.
I'm a mailman developer, and our existing documentation is mostly produced through the old make-how-to system, and
Wow.
I'm interested in learning some alternatives.
Okay.
Hi, I'm part of the team that's translating the Python documentation to Portuguese in Brazil, and we are interested in learning how to customize the HTML output to be able to integrate it with the commenting system, to make the documentation more interactive.
I'll plus one to that.
Like the PHP one. It's something that actually the main Python documentation needs that, an integrated commenting system.
And just to be decently formatted.
Sorry?
And just to be decently formatted.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but it always looks horrible on my Google Chrome.
What, the PHP one? No.
I'm sorry. The Python docs. Sorry.
Yeah, so
I said the wrong
I'm interested in learning about how to customize the templates and that kind of thing. And also, sometimes I need to make printed documents, PDF format, and I'm also interested in learning how to customize that.
All right.
I'm going to be converted. I think all of the docs in my code look ugly, and I want you to show me how to make it not ugly, and then maybe I'll write the document.
Okay.
Yeah, getting pretty much started, have some projects that I'd like to use this on. Also, I'm interested in the EPUB export and how that might be improved or looked at. I'm
Cool.
I work on Media Goblin and we're pretty new, so I'd like to have more tools in the box to help our documentation keep pace with our code.
Did you say Media Goblin?
Yeah.
Cool. I don't know what it is, but good name. Media Goblin. That opens like a whole range of possible new
It's
effort.
decentralized media hosting, so everybody has their own instance. So documentation is really important because we want people to be able to host on their own servers at home or
Gotcha.
community colas and things like that. So if they can't figure out what they're supposed to do, then IRC is going to pass stuff.
Cool. Because when you said the name, I immediately started thinking of television orc and other Vimeo troll and stuff. All right.
I just wanted to create some easier to use documentation for some of our internal projects.
Cool.
We're kind of embarking on building a fairly substantial library of wrappers around a C++ code base of ours, and I'd like to get it well documented. I'm particularly interested in sort of the auto extraction from docs right now.
Well, right now I use for documentation, printing out moin pages.
Oh,
Those
wow.
are very nice. Sphinx documents I've looked at look a lot better, so I'd like to try that instead.
Great.
One of about two people responsible for creating the Python infrastructure for all Python users in Netflix to interact with the stuff in the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been vastly better at writing. I've been vastly more, I've written a lot more code than documentation. I'm hoping Sphinx may be able to help me remedy that character flaw.
About two people. Maybe a little more or less.
It's messy.
Gotcha.
I've been working on a Python-based project using Ginger 2 to do some code generation, and for a couple of packages we have. And I've been using Sphinx to document that. And I'm here basically to see what are the things that I didn't realize it could do. You know, how can I do it better? Tricks, you know.
Cool.
I'm interested in how to structure, distribute, and deploy docs for a Python package correctly or in a standard way.
Okay.
I've done one Sphinx project, and I kind of like to find out what I did. It worked, but I don't know why. And especially the API things, extraction documents and things like that.
Cool.
Our attempts at documentation is this text file, so I heard this is better. So
It's text files with like ugly, jagged little things inside. It's pretty cool.
Part of the automation team for my test team at work. We have a very large code base now, but everything's dot strings. We want to be able to track it effectively to a new pattern.
I'm new to Sphinx. In the past, we've used epidoc, your API doc.
That's the one with frames.
Yes.
Sort of, it tries to look like an IDE. Kind of has the files along the left, and then in the center frame, it brings up what you're looking at.
And that's worked okay, but I think the Sphinx docs is a lot better.
Yeah, I'm part of a two-person team that works in the Galapagos Islands, and we do web development with Django. So we've already started doing some documentation with Sphinx, but I want to learn more how to do collaborative documentation, how to leverage a bit more of the Autodoc features, and yeah, like you said, internationalization, localization. For us, because we're doing English and Spanish is really key.
Does the Galapagos, do you have to use satellite uplink, or does someone run a cable there?
Like I imagine you working in the early 90s with internet and stuff.
Okay, and so you do not know. I was trying to think. Has anyone run an undersea cable just for the Galapagos?
1000K from Ecuador, so yeah, everything's satellite.
Wow.
Internet is it's a touchy subject.
I won't mention it again.
Okay, thank you.
I've used your structure types in the past. Let me know API docs. And I want to get into building more like larger systems of documentation.
Okay.
I provide training to new programmers. Sphinx is new to me, but I'd like to try Sphinx.
the dreaded screensaver. All right, and finally,
Yeah, manage a bunch of cats, trying to get them to be better documenters, and I thought that more automated could get them better.
I will resist bringing up any clever cat pictures in response to that. All right, thank you. I was able to make several notes of points that would have been hit lightly, but I'll make sure that I do them more thoroughly. The first thing we're going to do is we're all going to document a small project using Sphinx together. We're going to get you guys up and running with a fresh Sphinx project, and you're going to learn how to build it to HTML. You're going to bring that up in your browser. You'll also open whatever your editor of choice is, and iteratively through probably this first half of the tutorial up to the break, and then maybe bleeding over a little into the second half, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be putting up a goal. I'm going to be putting up a pretty HTML formatted snippet of documentation and telling you, all right, this is the next thing that you need to go add to your project. And you guys will go into the raw text files. I'll have pointed out some parts of the Sphinx documentation that you might want to be looking at as you try to produce the features you see on the screen. And you'll be able to play, add stuff, type stuff, keep building and hitting reload until you kind of like what you see and you've been able to apparently reproduce the features that I have on the screen. Then after you guys have been playing for 3, 4, or 5 minutes, I'll pull it back in and I'll show you in my text file how I produce the effect, and we'll compare how we did it and learn through all of the basic Sphinx directives and Sphinx features that way. So what am I going to need? I'm going to need my web browser. And let me also bring my editor of choice up into position. Let's see. And let me verify that I can easily flip back and forth between them. The first thing that you need to do is you need to be at the point, as I said as you were coming in, where you're able to run the Sphinx Quick Start command. If you jump to page 7 of your handout, and by the way, the other pages of the handout have some pretty cool stuff. Like I gave you a history of why text files are important and ways to think about them and stuff like that. But I kind of created this document partly to have sections that help us during the tutorial, but also to give you something to read at home or when you're bored and waiting for the tutorials to start. And so, you know, flip through this when you're done, because I tried to hit some different points in here than the ones that I'll probably be able to hit live. But starting on page 7, actually flip to page 8, we have an example of how you run the Sphinx Quick Start command. Essentially, the default is that it creates in the current directory a big set of files that are illustrated a little further down. I have a kind of a really shoddy ASCII diagram, really, of the directories and files that it creates when you start it up. And at the moment, ignore the triangles module. It won't be there yet. But what you'll want to do is run Sphinx Quick Start, go through answering its questions, and I would run it in a fresh directory. So this is what you want to do right now. Create a fresh directory, move into it, run Sphinx Quick Start, answer the questions. Hopefully I cut and pasted correctly, and hopefully on your platform it gives you the same list of questions. If not, just raise your hand and I'll come over to help. And let's see if we can all get to kind of square one, which is having a working Sphinx project. So see what happens.
questions at this time?
Yes, let me, I'll start back here. What's going on here?
It's just that how, you know, I always choose to like this when I don't know what the use case is to justify, you know, separate the source and view and not using the current view as source.
But then it's actually what you can do is just type SPH. Oh my gosh, cool. Awesome, you have it installed already. Yes, sir.
The question was about, I
And
always
by the
prefer-
way, you don't have to put my name as the author, but put your own names.
This first, the question about having separate source and view directives, I usually prefer to have the default. But what's the use case that justifies choosing otherwise?
That's something we're calling, I have a little diagram that I'll show you later of the two cases. Good question. Yes.
So I might give this a this modules facility.
It should, yeah, it actually should just be this, the doc directory. We essentially just created the doc directory of what I here show as a larger project.
Okay, and it shouldn't be under.
It should just be sitting in the directory. Just keep on until there is a file there called triangles.zip. I'm about to start passing around a few key fobs with a little file on it called triangles.zip. When you get the key fob, just grab the triangles.zip file and go ahead and unzip it right into this new documentation directory you've created, because I think that'll be the most convenient place to put it.
Is there a place online where it's available?
Is there what?
Is there a place online where it's available too?
I don't think so.
Right into the docs, into the doc folder.
Into the folder where you just ran Sphinx Quick Start.
All right. Should probably finish doing that.
Yeah. I'll start this one at the back to go around this way. And so let's circle back around. And first, could I have any comments about, like, was anything here particularly difficult or funny to get working or especially unclear in the Sphinx documentation and the restructure text documentation? Did anyone have a good or bad experience they quickly want to share before I show my solution? Vague question.
I was surprised by how hard it was to get an indented paragraph separated from the above line. I had no problem getting the indentation going.
Yeah?
But there was, for some reason,
Did you do a blank line and then a bunch of spaces as the general approach, or?
See, that actually created a completely different markup for me.
Show me on your page. You doubled that. Undouble it and try again. And yeah, perfect. And thank you. That's an important distinction that I need to point out to people, that the double. Let me go into my editor here and show you how this looked when I wrote it. This is, I believe, my stage 2 document. So in order to get the, let's look at first, there's the big document title, Triangles for Python, a normal paragraph, and then a block quote, as it's called, an HTML paragraph, which I created, of course, by double asterisking the word polygon, make it all pretty, and then I simply indented the paragraph that followed and was able to turn it italics by surrounding the text with single asterisks. You have to be careful if you want a normal paragraph, as we'll see in a moment. The way to get a block of literal code displayed is to end a paragraph with a double colon. And, excuse me while I go down and, let's see, I need to go into stage 2 and run my build script there. So I just made this change. I put a double colon here, and once it... Oh, did I kill my web server? All right, I will start it back up in a second when you're not watching. And if you put a double colon here, you can try this yourself. It thinks that this is like Python code or C code or something like that, and will just put asterisk the text and another asterisk literally inside of like a green code box. It is by avoiding that habit, simply having a normal paragraph followed by another normal paragraph that happens to be indented, that you can get a block quote. I then wanted a subheading, and the rule you might have seen in the docs and restructure text is that you're free to make up whatever underlines you want for your heading. Whatever looks beautiful and readable to you as you're reading a plain text file, you can use as an underline. You can either do something like this, and for like really, really big titles, put both an over and underline. I tend to just underline them to be simpler. But the idea is that each time restructured text sees a new style, it assumes that you're going one level further down, because documents start with top-level headings and maybe have several headings of that size. But when you go to another style, it's always a smaller one. So here, it sees that my second heading is, instead of being underlined with equal signs, underlined with dashes. It says, okay, that must be Brandon's convention, that second level headings have dashes. And again, it just learns this as it reads through the file. The first time it encounters a new subheading, it says, well, it's a different style. He used tildes, he used hash marks, he used something new, so I must be at a new level down. And then it remembers that for the rest of the document. If you looked at the docs, you saw that there were several ways to write HTML references, because you saw in my document that I had a link to the Wikipedia page on the triangle. There are, if we jump over, and I will use the, we'll look in the Sphinx documentation for this. When it talks about links, it says use, and I went ahead and used what they sort of seem to consider in the Sphinx documentation the preferred style of several different styles restructured text offers, to do a link where, and I like it because it reminds me of an email address. Way back in the old days, an email address was simply foo@bar.com, but eventually, because that often didn't look like the person's name, they added the idea of using angle brackets like you see all the time now, so the person could write their name normally, legibly, in a good character set or whatever, and then put the computer-readable email address off to the side. Well, the way to do a link, or one of them, is to simply follow that same idea inside of, this is a little weird, single backticks, which, as we'll see, is the way to do several different special constructs in Sphinx. Single backticks with something like an email address, but with a URL in the angle brackets. And then there needs to be something that indicates that this particular use of single backticks, of which there are several, is trying to link you to somewhere. And they decided that a little tail going off the end looks like an arrow. That's what they said. They actually, I think, say that in one of their documents. When you see the single ticks and then that underscore taking you off towards the sunset, it's indicating this is an HTML reference that's going outside of your documentation somewhere. Half the time, that crazy explanation actually makes me remember how to do hyperlinks, and I'm able to just type it. Other half the time, I come here and look it up. You can also, if it's just a really long and ugly URL, or if it's a URL you're having to use several times, you can instead not include the URL in line, because again, if you have to link to something 5 times, you'd have to paste the URL in every time you used it, and then somewhere further down in your document, before or after you use the links, it doesn't matter, you can use this little, it looks like a comment. It almost looks like a comment here because it starts with ... and a space, but then, just as the link kind of used the underscore to take off, there is the little underscore where it lands and finds the link it's supposed to go to. An explanation that, again, about half the time reminds me how to type this without looking it up. Half the time I mess it up and have to go look it up anyway. But the idea is that the omitted link leaps off of that little underscore and down onto the one there. It checks and it finds the same name. Then it uses that URL as the target. The
I always mix them up, so I end up putting the interlink stuff because for some reason I always put the underscore before the link, before the
Yes.
backtick, and then mess it up and
because yeah, because I went the wrong direction here. Because here, when you define the target, you do put the underscore first, and so yes, again, half the time I remember that the link ends with the underscore, that then lands you down at the other one. And again, as you can see, a restructured text started off, all of these markup languages start off with a noble intention, that you just be able to write plain text like you'd put in an email, with little asterisks around words that you want highlighted, and it just magically comes out as beautiful documentation. This is the first of several examples you'll find where there just wasn't an existing email convention for a pretty hyperlink with other text on top of the URL. So they had to invent one. Going back to how I typed the document, I just was able to create that little indented list with some asterisks like this, actually very much like I do bulleted lists in email. And then, when I wanted a little inline bit of Python code displayed as code, I wrote a paragraph, but instead of ending it normally like I would in English, I put a double colon at the end of a paragraph, because paragraphs that introduce code very often end with a colon anyway. So the special signal, which they decided you'd never really need to do and have in your printed output, the special signal of a double colon at the end of a preceding paragraph means that the following indented material is all wrapped up and formatted as a code block with all of the special characters intact and with no interpretation done on it. You can use asterisks, and it doesn't think you're doing italics. It knows that you actually have asterisks in your code. If the text doesn't kind of naturally end with a colon, then, if it said, you can try this period, and it just made no sense to have a colon, If you don't attach the colon to the preceding text, then it simply omits both colons from the output. So if the paragraph just makes no sense with a colon at the end, or you're halfway through a long document and you're just sick of colons, or you're running out, or you've hit your quota, this is how you can signal a code block without having to end the paragraph mandatorily with a colon. And in fact, if the preceding thing isn't a normal paragraph at all, but a heading or something else, you can simply put the colon on its own line by itself as what appears to be a little standalone paragraph, and the whole thing is just eaten and disappears, and you get whatever the preceding content is, title or whatever else, immediately followed by a code block in the output. So this is a very fundamental and a very important little convention of either attaching a literal colon to the end of your paragraph, sticking colon after the last word of your paragraph, or if you need to, just having one that's standing alone. Any of those conventions will get you a code block as the next thing formatted. Yes, sir? Is there a what? He was asking, is there any difference in output between putting it here, and putting it here? There is no difference in output. Those are all different conventions for doing the exact same thing. Yes, sir?
About the bullet points, in my experience, when we need to have indented, like subsections of the list, it's hard to predict how the interline spacing happens in the output. Sometimes you have more space between lines and sometimes less, and it's difficult to predict.
I have experienced that. I don't have time during this tutorial to go in detail, but I can right afterwards we can talk about that. But you guys will notice that when you, and then this is the essence of it. If you do a list like this and ask for HTML output, then you simply get 3 list items with this text. If in any of the list items you do something more complicated, like maybe this first bullet point has a code block inside of it, then it has to put a wrapper, I think a div, but I'd have to look, around this whole first unordered list item, because it now has inside of it a paragraph and a code block, and it needs something, or maybe, I can't remember absent a paragraph, but essentially what you'll then get is, it comes down, I think this is it, it creates the list item, and now the list item, first one, has 2 children, a paragraph and a code block. It will then promote the second 2, for the sake of symmetry, to being paragraphs inside of list items as well. So again, whereas this produced 3 list items with no element inside, this produces 3 elements, all of which, even the ones you didn't add code to, have a paragraph wrapping them for symmetry. And if your paragraph styling in your HTML theme adds some margins or padding, then you'll see that all of the list elements suddenly are like indented further over than you expect. But we can go into specific CSS tricks for that later. Something I should have mentioned. Can we change to like the mood lighting in here? I'm sorry, we're an hour into it, and I'm just now thinking to ask this. Does that make it easier to see the screen? All right. I'm not sure I would do that after lunch because of the whole sleep effect, but I think right now we'll be able to keep going. So those are the tricks I used, and again, there's variation here, a few different ways you could have done it, but that's the way that I created the HTML page with all of the features that you just saw.
So I tried to put a code block in a bullet, and that's not working.
I will come look at it during the next exercise. Or actually what I'll do is I'll try running this one I created and see what kind of error I have managed to produce by improvising. For the moment, let's get you guys started on another exercise. At the moment, all right, everybody I'm going to give you 1 minute to do something very simple. You have an index.rst document, right? Next to it, I want you to create 2 additional documents, one called guide.rst and one called api.rst. And you can just put the word foo inside of them or whatever, but just quickly next to index.rst, and here I'll write the names so that you, next to index.rst, create a guide.rst and api.rst, and just put a single word like foo or something in them, and I'll give you a second to finish that, and then we will all try running the Sphinx build command at the same time. And just for fun, I'll do the same thing. Foo. Bar. And am I in the wrong? Nope, here I am. All right, is everybody ready? Run your build command. And then in a panic, remember that you are supposed to say HTML after the word make. Run it again. And did everyone get a warning? When I ran build, I got a warning from each of those documents. Remember, it goes through and just it searches the directory tree you're in and finds all RST documents and tries to build them. But then it does something that's not fatal, it's just to give warnings. It does a consistency check, and it noticed that I had 2 documents that weren't included in my table of contents. Now, it's not so terribly offended about that. It will go ahead and build them. Maybe I have hyperlinks I've built to where those documents are going to live, and it's okay. But it's warning me that they are not in my table of contents, which is something you build manually, and that therefore they won't show up here. When you're doing HTML, every single source file just gets turned into an HTML file. API.html, guide.html, no problem. But when you're doing a printed document, if the document isn't listed in the table of contents, how would it know where to put it? And so, in printed documentation, in documentation that produces a single stream of text, restructured text can only include the documents that are in the table of contents so that it knows what order to stick their pages in along with all of the other documents' pages. How do you do that? By going back to index.rst and building a table of contents, and I have a prepared example here, and this is how you do it. Go ahead and type this into your index.rst file. Again, it looks like a comment is starting, but this double colon at the end of the keyword indicates that this is actually something that RST calls a directive, and Sphinx defines lots of directives that we'll be using today. This is the table of contents tree directive. You can optionally tell it how deep to go before stopping. The important thing is that you name in the order you want them to appear in printed content and in the order that you want them listed in your online table of contents. You don't have to put the .rst suffixes, just put the bare extensionless names of the documents you want included. If you add that and go rebuild, then you should find that your index page table of contents now is able to list and include those documents. All right, what are we going to do next? I am going to, yes, sir.
More warnings about guide and API not having a title, so no need to
Because all you have is the word foo in there so far. And the next thing you're going to do is to add some titles. Yes, the table of contents needs a name. It needs a pretty human-readable name for each document. So this is what you're going to do.
In my case, I didn't get a warning saying that they were unused documents.
Well, do you guys have the while loop though in the other terminal?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I didn't get a warning.
You have it
I can come look at that in a second as people start on the exercises. So I am going to, let's see, first I'm going to set you guys off on go into your guide.html and try to make it look something like this to give you more experience with the documentation. Just for fun, I've thrown in a footnote. And don't right now yet try to make those pieces of text into hyperlinks. But go ahead and try to make this the text of your guide.html by writing restructured text, including the little code snippet and the paragraph and the footnote. Go, and I'll walk around and answer questions. Yes, sorry I didn't make clear enough that until the document has a title, actually I thought that it used the file name, but it obviously doesn't. If it can't find a title, it just omits your document from the table of contents anyway. For some reason, I thought I'd once remembered omitting a title and just getting the ugly document name there anyway, but apparently it prefers just to omit the documentation instead of having something ugly. Ah, Sphinx. Be very careful. Thank you. Remember. All right, so let's circle back around. The guide.html, hopefully, as you're sitting there typing, rebuilding, and reloading, it's starting to look something like this. My version of it, let's see, looks something like this. And let me show you two features that I'm using that you won't have included yet, probably. I have a title. I used single quotes in order to produce the pretty single quotes, single asterisks to produce the pretty italics. And in this case, I omitted both the double colon and the indentation when doing my little code snippet, because remember that restructured text was written by Python people. There is an utterly unambiguous way to know that a paragraph is not normal English, but is in fact a Python prompt session. And that utterly unambiguous way is if it begins with greater than, space. No other form of information in this entire world begins with greater than, space. And so, huh? That's true, but but they usually don't. Okay, so if you had an email that started with, all right, I lied, but that's still the convention. If it sees 3 greater thans, and by the way, what if you did have an email in here? What you'd have to do, if you didn't want it to interpret this as especially being Python, we'll see later that there's some ways you could mark it up as a different kind of code. In any event, it sees this paragraph, it sees the triple quotes, and says, triple chevron, and says this must be a code block that contains a session at the Python prompt, and automatically formats it as a code block. You can see that for fun, I have the little footnote of letting you know when antiquity happened. And I went ahead and used a feature that we will now learn about. we wanted, of course, as we saw, the word triangle to let the people jump from this guide to our module over into our API docs where the triangle class is in fact defined. And I wanted to be able to have this little is similar method name be a link over into some API docs where that method is actually defined. And the syntax for that is a little bit hairy. You use a special directive. The directives in a paragraph are done by having a word that begins surrounded by colons. So here I said I wanted a class hyperlink to, and notice I don't name the document it's in or the directory that the document is in. I simply name the fully qualified Python expression, like you import, to get the object in question. And because Sphinx, as we'll see, knows as I'm doing API documentation the fully qualified name of every class and every method and every function I document, it can use this simple specification, package name.class or whatever. It can use this to unambiguously create a hyperlink that goes to the correct place in the documentation if you use the fully qualified name. In fact, looking at this, I'm not sure if this is the correct fully qualified name, but I'm sure you'll track that down for me in a minute. You'll note that even though this string here is fully qualified, my built documentation simply names the thing without putting the package or the class or the module in front of it. That, as you'll see in the documentation, is what this little tilde means at the front. Sometimes when writing docs, you want to fully qualify it because you can, as you're writing, you're like, at this point the person's going to be disoriented. I'm talking about so many different packages. Let's just fully qualify triangles.triangle so they remember where this class comes from. But very often, if you've already mentioned something in documentation, you just want to mention it by its simple, unqualified name. And the tilde here means that even though the source, and thus restructured text and Sphinx, know the real full name of the class you're talking about, they'll cut off all of the leading dot-separated elements when displaying it and only show that last name. Now, obviously, for a link like this to work, we need some API documentation. And by the way, I actually think that this maybe should have been, I don't know why it worked for me earlier unless I was using an old version of the triangles module. Watch out in a minute, this might actually need to be triangles.shape.triangle, but you'll figure that out in a moment because I'm about to show you how to automatically generate API documentation. We're due for a break in a minute, so this is our last awesome feature before the break, is we're going to ask Sphinx to generate this whole right piece of documentation for us so that we don't have to type it. I passed around a key fob with something called triangle or triangles.zip. Have all of you guys at this point gotten that zip file? My intention was to have you unpack it right there into your documentation directory where your make file and your index.rstr. All of you, how many have done that? And if you haven't done that yet, go unpack that zip file because having it available, and when you're doing this in production, so to speak, you don't have to put it in the same directory. It can be anywhere that's on your Python path. But since a lot of you guys probably don't have a Python path set up that you can easily point somewhere else, we're going to go into the configuration file, and I'm going to show you how you both turn on an option that you maybe didn't answer yes to when running Sphinx Quick Start, and then for this particular feature, which needs to actually import your package to introspect it and see what classes and names are there, I'm going to show you how to make sure that that triangles module winds up on your path. Both of those things can be done with this neat little conf.py file. It doesn't look very good in this editor because they build it for the Python standard of 80 columns. Yes, sir?
When you say unpackage into your local directory, does that mean that we should have a bunch
you should have the triangles directory. Good question. I'm not an expert at building zip files. Did the zip file include the triangles? Good. Yes, so I mean there should be the triangles directory sitting next to your stuff. And it has under a dunder init.py. It was at PyCon that I first learned how to pronounce that 3 years ago, dunder init. Because it's just really horrible to say underscore underscore init underscore underscore. So if you go into your conf.py file, open it and look down under general configuration for something called extensions equals. Do you remember all of those yes/no questions that you answered during initialization? You were really just writing an extensions list. It's a list of strings, each of which name the fully qualified Sphinx extension module that you want activated. Don't worry about having to learn the module names. They're all in the Sphinx docs. If you go to the website, there's a whole section on extensions. You can read through them. And if you want to try one out, you just add its name to your list of extensions, and it will be activated. This particular extension needs to be able to load your, in this case, the triangles module. So if we scroll down, and I might do a search if this isn't going fast enough. I'm going to search for the word path. Path. Oh, it was up above general configuration. No wonder I didn't find it immediately. You'll see that right up at the top of conf.py, it invites you to add anything here to your sys.path that you're going to need Sphinx to import for you. In particular, now, I mean, you could, if you had a Sphinx extension someone had just freshly written, unpacked somewhere, maybe you would come in here and add the directory to that extension so Sphinx could find it. But we are using a built-in Sphinx extension that we will need to give the power to import our triangles module. So I think you should be able to do something like this: Sphinx path, sys path, insert at position 0, the beginning of the sys.path list. And I am going to do, that's exactly what they had already, isn't it? Sys path insert at position 0, the absolute path name of the current directory, because that's where we've put that triangles package. Yes, sir? I think only if you run a script in the local directory. All I can say is that it didn't work for me earlier, so I had to add this line, as the comment recommends. And I'm going to actually use an Emacs feature of splitting the screen here, because if you guys are still copying or need to debug this later, I want you to be able to find this. So if you add that, then you ought to be able to go into your api.rst file and write this. I gave it a title, so it'll finally be included in the table of contents. I then used a directive that only exists if AutoDoc is active. It can only work on one module at a time. If your package has 100 modules, you'll have to say auto module 100 times, thus telling Sphinx where you want the description of all of the objects in each module placed in your documentation. In this case, I know there's hardly anything in triangles. Most of the really interesting stuff is in triangles.shape, and so I'm going ahead and just including both of those modules smack dab next to each other in the same file. In a much larger project, you might create a foo.rst and a bar.rst, each of which simply does a single auto module import of the foo module and the bar module. If you have a package, several packages in your project, maybe you'll have an RST file per package, but that then auto modules, maybe with subtitles between them to make it clear where one stops and the next begins, all of the different submodules in that package. There's a lot of different options there, where to break stuff up with titles, whether to put auto introspected modules into single RST files or many. And that's kind of up to you. It's sort of an artistic decision whether that HTML file is getting too long and needs to be split into pieces. Anyway, when you have this working and hit build, are any of you, and I'll come back to the editor in a second, are any of you, when you hit build, seeing something like this?
But I don't see a way to get to the triangle shape, or to the shape of the other.
Change your URL.
Triangles.shape. There's no link to, there's a link to triangles, but not to
Are you talking about the guide over here?
No, on the, talking about the index page, in the index page I have a link to triangles API.
Okay, which is the title of this document.
API.html, yeah, and I see this content.
All right?
But I don't see a way to get to the one that was supposed to be generated for the triangles.shape, or is it all together here?
It's all together. In fact, if you go, now, and in fact, before you go to break, go look at the triangle source code to see where these strings are coming from. This, and remember I noted that it's often clearer if you put some sort of subtitle to visually separate these, because in fact, this first paragraph here, that's the entire documentation of the triangles package. Because my little dunder init file just has a, triple quotes with that single string in it. So in fact, everything from here down is coming from my triangles.shape module. And again, you can either make that very explicit by adding a subheading, or in this case, because that first paragraph was such a little throwaway paragraph, I just got rid of that. And because I didn't think the user would be confused when they reached this line about kind of where I was, because notice that the documentation automatically fully qualifies the name, so they'll know where to import that from. So at this point, we have an index with a table of contents that should now slowly be growing. We have a little guide that we've started that will tell users who are new to our software how to use this API. And then we have some automatically generated API docs. It's time now for us to have our 20-minute break. I'm going to come help those of you guys for whom this isn't working, help you get your Python paths set up so that the AutoDoc works. And then we will regroup, it looks like, right at 11 and finish out the second half of the tutorial. Thank you very much. Yes, sir. All right, guys, it's time to get started again. I should adjust my microphone. There we go. So I've done something that I did not intend. I have made most of you guys suffer through an entire half of a tutorial looking at that horrible blue, boxy, gray, kind of depressing theme. And I apologize. It was actually in the slightly earlier part of the talk that I made the note to myself, put them out of their misery, teach them how to set the theme, and I skipped over it by accident. So let's do that right now to celebrate the happy opening of the second half of this tutorial. Go to the Sphinx documentation. Let's see if I can find it. If you go to the Sphinx site, click on documentation, and then search the page for THEM, the first few letters of the word theme. And I always stop there because I never know whether it says theme with an E or theme-ing with an I. It turns out it uses both. But you'll see something called HTML theming support. That's a single page. All of these three subheadings are simply subheadings on that page. If you visit that page, then you will see that it describes how you can go into your conf.py file. If you go look, you will find there's already a setting there named HTML theme that you can edit. And if you scroll down, you'll even see that it has a list with little screenshots of some built-in themes. So you right now have 2 minutes to go into your conf.py file, change the theme. You might need to remove the build directory to underscore build directory to force a rebuild once you change the theme, or Sphinx might detect it. One of you who does it first, let me know. But start playing with these themes, choose the one you like best, and you'll get to finish out the tutorial with that as the active theme instead of the one you've been using. So go for it. The theming and output formats, themes apply to HTML. This looks exactly the same no matter what theme you choose. Now, I should say, I believe that there are, this goes through an ancient documentation, an ancient text setting program called LaTeX, LaTeX, and I believe that there are in the conf file, and then even there are some options relating to the LaTeX output that let you customize it, and then in the docs of Sphinx, I think there's even further customizations that they don't bother to insert automatically into your conf.py. They're so obscure, but they are there if you want to do even fancier things with the PDF that comes out. But it's a separate theming system from the one that does HTML.
I didn't have to remove the build directory.
Good, okay. So it does. I was starting to get a little nervous because several of you guys had run into the bug that if a cross-reference didn't exist when you last edited the file, and then it comes into being because you turn your API documentation on. Everyone was having to remove their build directory or arbitrarily make a tiny edit to the guide file. So that had made me nervous, and I'm glad that in fact in this case Sphinx remembers what theme it used last time and gets to rebuild it. Yeah.
That might be a little buggy. Switching from switching from pyramid to haiku, I had to blow away the build directory.
Interesting.
So it might be buggy depending upon what themes you're switching between.
Because each theme you choose is like throwing a different group of CSS files, a different group of new HTML files, and one thing that you could be running into is that a CSS file that's normally not present is there if it was in the last theme you used or something crazy. But I actually do always blow away the build directory before, when I'm doing something big, like changing a theme or pulling in a new chunk of Autodoc documentation or something. As you guys are switching themes, you will doubtless notice, and let's go ahead and talk about, first, does everyone in their docs see that there's a little link called, yes, sir?
So this has worked relatively well, but it's been complaining for a while in building about a bunch of my index RSTs saying title underline too short.
It has to be exactly the same number of characters as the title.
It can be longer.
Oh, it can be longer without complaint?
Yes.
It just complains if it's too short. And that can be a problem if you're using a proportional font. Oh, actually not, because a proportional font would probably lead you to do too many dashes. But if you were using an equal sign, you might use too few, because that's a pretty wide character. But yeah, the idea is always try to keep those. And I use Emacs in its restructured text mode just with a single keystroke. I can have it correct all of my underscore all of my underline lengths, but do try to keep them the same or it gets complainy. Did someone put a hand up or something? What was I talking about? Anyone remember? Looking at the index. So if you go click on your documentation's index, you should see that even though it won't be till the next segment that we learn about adding index entries, you'll see that the Autodoc, when it set up the hierarchy of the module with the class inside of it, with the methods inside of that, am I correct that your indexes now all include those methods and classes as clickable links? I sense vague and slight agreement, so I will proceed. Now this is what really, one of the things, that's probably the first thing that really impressed me about Sphinx. There's this little, on most themes, there's a little quick search button. There's a quick search field, and go ahead and type something like triangles or is underscore similar into there and hit enter and see what happens. What are you guys finding? It just works? Try typing in something that's not significant and in the index. Just try typing in some word like Pythagoras or some word that I don't remember if we've used that one yet. Type in some word that we've already used in our text. Example? And are you seeing that is coming up as well? Yes? So Sphinx comes with a live HTML search system powered by JavaScript that works automatically. It not only indexes significant things like class names and method names, it actually builds a full text search of every word you use in your documentation in case one of your users doing a search, remembers a phrase and types it in to try to get somewhere in your documentation. And it does all of this without requiring a web server to be up and running. You'll note that we're not running Django, and I haven't made you install a full-text search module or anything. It is not requiring you to have something like the other big project named Sphinx, the big full-text search engine. We haven't had to set up Solr. We haven't had to set up PostgreSQL with its full-text search, which was a very deep mystery to me when I first saw this feature. Okay, I understand that there's JavaScript running on the page. That's very simple. It just means that the themes, in addition to providing HTML and CSS, have a JavaScript file. Fine. I understand that when I type into the search field and hit enter, JavaScript can go fetch a web page depending on what I've typed, or plain HTML forms could as well. Fine. But what was generating those results? Usually you need a big full-text search engine and a web server up and running. And it turns out that it does it, as you can see, it works completely through the magic of static files. Nothing here on the server is dynamic. It is, let's see, do I have a, let's see, can I come here? If you look inside of the, let's go to one that I've built more, already inside the build directory. I've got HTML. If you look inside of the _build HTML directory, what you will find is that it's created something called searchindex.js, which is a single blob of data containing the full text index to your entire website as a single blob. All of the data that would normally be inside of Solr or Django Haystack or whatever you're using to do searching is instead stored as a statically deliverable resource, which is why you don't need a web server up and running to provide the users of your documentation with a search engine, because the search engine works by a static JavaScript file having the instructions in it to fetch this static blob of data, and then right on the web page, right in the JavaScript running in the person's browser, it searches through this database for the terms they've typed and builds the set of results to display, all in line and all without any moving parts on the server. And this is actually one of my favorite little features, because it's really neat that without having that, I can just throw my Sphinx docs as a blob of static files up on Amazon S3 or in the HTML directory of WebFaction or whatever, and just the mere serving of static files gives what to users will look like this, wow, he went to the trouble of setting up a search engine for his documentation. And so that's probably my favorite freebie of all of the ones that come with Sphinx. So indexes and search comes built in. Again, that's why I had you serve this site with simple HTTP server. If we had instead just opened it with a file colon URL, everything would have been great up to this point. And when I told you to type something into the search engine, as ILS have learned from experience, nothing would have happened on most web browser browsers because it would have refused to let the JavaScript grab a file off the disk. So we're now going to go through 2 quick iterations of taking control of this API documentation. This looks a little weird. We have, a string pulled from the triangles module, followed by the doc string of the shape module, followed by a description of a triangle that gives you no idea how to instantiate it. Very, very often, when you pull documentation in using Autodoc, you'll find that giving Autodoc complete control and just telling it, use this module, go to town, doesn't work very well. And so we're going to go quickly through 2 little phases of trying to make this more customized. If I go to, and hold on, let me quickly make the screen flash to check. Yes, we're now going to a little directory I have here called stage 4. If I go into my api.rst, this is what I want you guys to go in right now and do. I want you to go into those module commands and turn them back into normal module commands. You can always type module : blah, and that does 2 things. That creates an index entry. If someone looks up triangles in the index or doing a full text search, it will send them here to learn about that module. The second thing it does is all symbols mentioned from there down are automatically assumed to live inside of that module. You'll see here where I say auto class triangle, I don't have to say triangles.shape.triangle because I've already warned it that everything from this line down is going to be functions or classes or constants that are inside of triangles.shape. So what we have here is a partial hijacking of Autodoc. What I've done is I've taken away its right because I didn't find the strings that made perfect sense in the source code to really make a lot of sense here at the top level of my document. So what I've done is I've turned off the auto-ness of grabbing the module. I've put in my own text that I think makes more sense for describing these objects, and then I have handed control back over when I call auto class to go automatically grab everything inside of triangle. That means I've got to write the arguments automatically, and that's something you have to watch. They can go out of sync if someone goes and changes the class, but it's because I really want to take over how the class is being represented. Now, I use auto class with : members, so I let it go grab everything inside of triangle, and here I'm going to recenter so that we can see the rest of what I wrote. But I then do one other thing. Inside, remember, be careful with the indentation and keep it lined up right with the letter A. It gives me the chance to write a first paragraph of description that it will stick in place of the, it sticks in between the name of the class and all of its methods. So I'll give you about 30 seconds to at least, if you don't have time to type all the text, at least make sure that you get these directives and their indentation copied over into your api.rst file, and then I will flip up and will finish by having you tweak it until it looks like the example I'm about to put up. Does everyone have at least the directives in some form copied over? And by the way, okay, keep going. And by the way, these are also in the documentation. If in a minute, as you're working on your docs, you break it, just leap over into the Sphinx documentation, and it has a little section describing the differences between the auto versions of module and class and the plain versions. Yes?
The question, your A, B, and C's are both starred, in other words, italicized. May I understand?
Emacs in restructured text mode draws the underline to remind me that I've highlighted those things by virtue of the asterisk. And if I run over here and like put a character here, which suddenly makes it not match the regular expression or whatever restructured text uses to detect, both asterisks have to be at word boundaries. So if I ruin that, Emacs turns the underline off so I can see that I'm not achieving the effect that I want to have in the output. So yes, the little underlines are just something my editor's adding so that I can see an approximation of the effect I'm going to have. I think that actually Emacs also, it also bolds things that I double. I guess it doesn't italicize them because I guess that's sort of barbaric, right? I mean, to have italics in a monospaced. I think Emacs just has too much taste to try courier italics, which are always just a disaster. And so instead it uses the underline, which is traditionally on a typewriter, which is, Emacs, big typewriter, clunky. Like a big Sears typewriter, ka-chunk when you hit enter. It just does the traditional typewriter way of representing underline. Do you guys remember that when we were young and like reports handed in at school just always had underlines under the novel names because we couldn't do italics because it was like 1985 or 75 or 95, depending on your age, but those were the days. I'll come help you personally if you need help with the directives, but to get everyone else started, I am coming over here, and this is, this is what was coming out on the right-hand side when we did AutoDoc, and I believe that the left is currently what your guide looks like. So 2 tasks here. Keep tweaking the right-hand side until it looks something like this, and again, everything from here down. The methods are still under the control of AutoDoc, so don't worry about them. If you see area and its description and all the other methods, that's working fine. But this is now the text that you're responsible for making look like this. And just to give you a little more practice, the guide up above the section you've already created, which you can just let scroll down to the bottom, here's another little bit of very important information about using the triangles class that you can try typing in as a practice of formatting poetry in restructured text. Did I see a hand back there and a need for help? The editor again here for a moment. One, always be watching if you can. If anything doesn't work, stop that auto build and try a little build by hand, because usually by the time I make it over to that window, the error has already flown past. And very often, if something's behaving oddly, it's just because there's a little error and you'll never guess what it is or I never do, unless I go look at the error message. For instance, what someone had just done is when they changed auto module triangle's shape with the option turned on to pull in all of the members, classes in this case, inside of that module, they turned this off, but they didn't notice that my code simply said this, and they left members in, and so their console, every time it tried to rebuild, said, dude, it didn't say dude. It said, members is not a valid option for module, which makes perfect sense. It's an auto module option, not a module option. Module never goes and grabs members by itself, so the module command doesn't know what to do with that. And then the problem was that auto class was giving him an error, because remember I told you that it knows, without us having to fully qualify it, it knows where triangle is without us putting triangles.shape in front of the name of the class. Well, if this directive is broken and not being interpreted successfully, it looks for triangle out in the triangles package, the last thing that was mentioned as a module, not in triangles.shape where it actually lives, which means that you get an error saying, I can't find this class that you're claiming exists, and so none of the automatic documentation appeared. And I spent like a minute and a half or 2 minutes working with him to try to get this auto class working and not understanding what was wrong, until I noticed that there was an error up above it being printed out about this directive having an illegal option. And that is a big thing when it's just like when using compilers, when like a compiler dies and there's some tiny error up at the beginning, so the whole rest of the file generates like 100 errors because one file didn't import. Always go up and look at the top error, which by this age, I'm familiar enough with build output that I can I see where all of the GCC calls end and where that huge glob of output begins of all the compiler errors of the step that failed. So I can go look and find the very first error. But looking at his screen just a minute ago, I am not yet that good with Sphinx output, despite how much I've used it. Its verbose little format sometimes hides the first error because it looks so much like the rest of the output, and I paid attention to the message of the bigger second error, but always make an effort to take a pause, take a deep breath, look, and make sure you're tackling the first error in your document, because if it's invalidating a command or a format, then the rest of the document might encounter further errors because of that. As a final step in our adventure here, we're going to do it the Python documentation because they use Sphinx for the standard library documentation. We are going to take a step that they took fairly early in the project, which is they ditched all auto-docking. Now, I understand that I love Autodoc because a lot of my projects, there's just not the bandwidth to handwrite documentation that explains all over again, but better, what the doc strings already explain. So very often I just use auto module or normal module and then auto class statements, usually explaining instantiation, like I did right here in this custom paragraph. I very often use this technique to just pull in my doc strings, and I try to make the doc strings sensible enough that the result is decent, usable API documentation. The Python standard library, though, they tried. They really, really tried. And they just found repeatedly that the kind of things you need to say in source code, things that pop up in an IDE when you mouse over a class, the kind of things that make sense as you're editing the file, were just different than what an outsider using your API needed to read. So for the standard library, auto class and auto module have just been abandoned. And they wound up in stages, just like we've done. Let me silence my phone. They wound up stage by stage, first customizing the way the module was described, then customizing the way the class was described, and then just finally realizing that the Python standard library, with its audience of people completely new to Python, people trying to learn the new module, just didn't work with doc strings. They needed documentation specifically written by hand by documentation people who didn't have source code commit access. Because if you're going to go change in big projects like Python, the group of people that help with the standard library docs are a whole different team than the people that write the source code. And instead of having the main source tree be filled with thousands and thousands of commits then needing to be merged in as people keep correcting verbs and making the doc strings more expressive, it also just helped with the fact that the documentation is one set of files and one group of people have commit rights, and the library code itself can be managed by a group of actual coders who can just have their ugly little infrequently touched doc strings that are perfect when you're in the code, but aren't what you need when someone is trying to use the email module for the first time. Being able to control the order, by the way, is also another big thing. You'll note that in the standard library, they try to often describe the methods in an order that is kind of maybe the order you'd call them in, or that bring you into the way the class behaves, going from simple operations to really deep and obscure ones you probably don't need to use. And you get a lot more control of order if you're not just saying auto module this entire module and letting the auto module class decide how to do that. There are directives, if you look at the docs, look at that later, to go into auto module or auto class, and you can tell it to omit a certain set of methods that you think shouldn't be included. You can tell it to include some of the ones that like begin with underscores that by default are hidden. You can also give it the order that you want the methods presented in, and it will do its normal thing of building that documentation itself, but it'll use the order you dictate. So there are some knobs that you can twiddle to make this automatically generated API documentation more useful, but many projects have abandoned it, and despite how nice it sounds, just prefer to maintain separate documentation. To show you what that looks like, here is another api.rst file where you're already familiar with the top of this file, and the difference here is that I've taken auto off of the class directive, just like we did for the module. I have taken members, members out because that's no longer an option because we're not using auto class. And now I actually have to learn to type what Autodoc was typing for me that whole time. Notice this is a little different. A module declaration is sticky and applies to everything down in the file beneath it, but a triangle class only applies, or a class only applies to those things indented beneath it. Once you pop out the level of indentation, you're out of the class and back to documenting normal functions. So if I got this and moved it down to the bottom, unindented, it would think that I was trying to document something up at the top level of the module. So this, and you can go ahead and type a little bit of this into your, yes?
Well, is there a way to make it generate this RST for us to automatically so that we can have a start?
Yes, I don't remember the name of that, and we can talk about it afterwards. There is, I've seen a command that will generate the outline that you can go then in and play with. Thank you, good question. But anyway, so as you type it, this is what has been, what Autodoc has been writing for you the whole time. It's not that scary. We see a new directive, predictively called method, that again, the main difference is that methods are such small things that they need to be indented beneath the class, and then of course the paragraph describing them needs to be indented beneath them, as many of you have been learning, with every line of text exactly lined up with the first letter of the directive. Otherwise, Sphinx goes crazy and gets confused. All right, I'm going to move from this to the goal, the rewritten documentation you're now moving for. If you could all, for one little moment, go into your conf.py file. We're just going to do a quick flyby, and we're going to turn something on. If you could, go into this file and add a third, yes, or at least with the ones I have turned on, add a third module to this list of extensions. Go into the extensions and add sphinx.ext.viewcode. I don't think it needs any extra options. We'll know in a moment.
Yeah, it's there.
It's what?
I have view code online.
If you hit Y when you were setting up the quick start.
Oh.
Or view source.
Okay. I hadn't remembered that I'd had that on by default. All right, I'm going to go up now, excuse the flash on the screen, to what we're aiming for now is we've just decided, and some projects get to this point, to take full control of Triangle API, and if this isn't working, let me know, because I didn't put anything in my notes, but I remember once having to add a little bit of additional configuration. But if you have view code up and running, you'll see that all of the classes and methods that you define actually should now have a link into a beautifully formatted copy of their source code. And while you're at it, go over to the, when you're done and you kind of have all of your auto stuff turned off, and you've taken control of your API, I've suggested another little section to add to the top of the guide to give you a little more practice with a different aspect of restructured text formatting. So go ahead and type that in and see if you can get your guide to have this additional section at the top when you're done playing with the API, and I'll walk around and help people.
My comp file didn't have those extension lines and jumped away and I didn't get it.
I'll come help you. Yes, thank you for mentioning that. We won't have time to get to it today, but if you look at the docs, there is something called literal include. It's a directive in Sphinx where you can give it a file name and a source code or text or whatever, and it will pull that in and format it in place, letting you keep larger blocks of code in their own file rather than having to indent the whole example program or whatever artificially in order to represent it in line in your restructured text document. And it also even has an option you can add beneath it to pick particular lines out of a file so that you can actually just say, go into this file, pull out this one function, this, lines 1 through 20, and include them as source that I want to talk about in my documentation. Let me mention at this point that one of the beautiful things about having your documentation stored as plain text is that if any of you guys, how many people here have ever used version control? Anything from BitKeeper to Mercurial and Git. Version control loves to see that lines have changed. And one of the problems that you'll find as you start version controlling restructured text is that you will be tempted, and I've in fact given into the temptation here. Let's look at this paragraph, for example. I have given into the temptation, because I often write restructured text for two audiences, people that are just going to open up the source code when they grab a distribution of my package, and people reading it on the web, that in deference to that first audience, I often fill or format the paragraphs so that all the lines are about the same width, because that looks very good visually. It has a significant problem, though, which, as many of you already know, just by finding out that you have to add a few words to the first line of the paragraph, every subsequent line then looks different, because a few words now get knocked off the end of every line and move to the subsequent one. And this means that when all you did is add a word that was missing to the first line of the paragraph, your version control might show 10 or 20 lines of change, because every line in the paragraph has changed. So often when I'm doing text for like really industrial uses, when I'm writing a book for someone or writing a blog post or something where there's not as much importance to someone just opening the file and needing to see pretty plain text in the source, I adopt a practice that was originally encouraged back at Bell Labs in the 1970s, when the Unix systems text processing tools and version control were first being invented in the form that we use it today. What they encouraged you to do, because back then, you think VI is primitive, they used something that had all of VI's commands, but it was named ed, and it was a little line editor where you could only see one line of your code at a time. And because it was so hard to move lines of text around, and you didn't even want to think about having to reformat 10 lines of text to slowly move little words off of each line and down onto the next one, they would format this paragraph like this, almost as though writing like blank verse poetry or whatever that's called, where they put a clause or a thought on each line and break the lines where the sense breaks. Two triangles are similar, a concept defined back in antiquity, when one triangle is a scale model of the other. You can test this by creating two instances of the triangle's triangle class and calling one of their is-similar methods. This is going to render to the exact same PDF, the exact same HTML, the exact same Sphinx output as any other method of breaking the paragraph, including putting one word per line. As long as there's no intervening blank lines, it's just a paragraph as far as Sphinx is concerned. But by doing this, I have all of a sudden turned sentences into contiguous blocks of lines. Have you guys ever edited text files in Microsoft Word or something that keeps it looking like a paragraph? So you have to peer into the middle of the paragraph to find the beginning and end of a sentence that you want to excise and move out into its own paragraph or something. For a long time, I have been formatting a lot of my text source code like this, because if I suddenly realize that the sentence belongs somewhere else, whether you're using VI, whether you're using Emacs, I spend a lot of my day with my cursor pegged to the left margin and say, oh, this sentence needs to go beneath the other one. Done. And maybe I then have to go fix up a little bit of punctuation at the end. If I find that a clause doesn't make sense, I can remove it, reorder it, easily get to the first or last word in a phrase. And the sense of what I'm saying now is bundled into distinct semantic units that are easy for my editor to process, instead of being spread in a way that's visually appealing, but semantically nonsense across words that are simply wrapped wherever I happen to run out of room. Version control loves this. I can say, you can try to test, or be happy when you test, and none of the other lines moved. None of the other lines changed. Git or Mercurial will see clearly that I've changed a few words in one line and haven't touched the rest of it. So if your audience needs to read a pretty text file that looks almost exactly like what they're going to see in HTML, then it's a single keystroke in Emacs, fill the paragraph. it doesn't know that I'm using a really big font at the moment, hence why it went for 80 columns when it just did the autofill. But it normally looks good. So go ahead and fill your paragraphs to look normally formatted if you really have an audience that's going to be hitting the plain text. But if the point of the text is primarily to support other formats you're outputting, I have not found a better system for maintaining text in plain text documents than the system that the guys who invented Unix back at Bell Labs invented when they weren't using restructured text. They were using an uglier system called troff and another version of it called nroff that had the same basic rules. You write a text file, you put some funny codes into the middle, and a really pretty document would come out of the Bell Labs Wang photo typesetter in Murray Hill with all of the italics and all of the other formatting in place. Yes?
I was just wondering, I doubt this is currently possible. Wouldn't it make sense if you want to format it like this to have a Sphinx converter that then outputs the kind of text file that someone would want?
It might already have it, because that's a very good point. Am I in a directory? No, I'm not. Changes, link text. Is there like a plain, where? Okay, yes. That is such an awesome idea that they thought of it. And thank you, I had forgotten about that. But you can have it read your restructured text and produce another plain text file that formats the paragraphs that someone reading a text file of documentation might expect if they aren't a Bell Labs kind of person.
And if you're auto-docking, you'll do that.
Huh?
If you're doing auto-docking, you'll insert all that too.
I don't know. I haven't done it. I remember trying that out when I first tried Sphinx, but you'll have to try and make text and see what comes out. I don't actually remember. Let's see, we're coming into what is, let's see, if I recall this, yes.
So that's a wonderful tip. Is there a name for this convention of how they wrote things back in the days?
No.
Blank verse.
What?
You said blank verse, right?
Oh, well, we could call it that, but they didn't have a name for it, no. That was back when, if you came up with an awesome idea, you just told the other guys at the lab down the hall at Murray Hill or Merrimack Valley or wherever your PDP-11 was at, and you didn't come up with awesome names for it because you couldn't put up a website. Hadn't been invented yet. So ideas didn't need names.
So the first idea was www.
And I think also they would have been just hard-pressed to name. I mean, the number of things that you just, I'm told, would learn in the hall talking to guys from another lab. I mean, the number of tips and tricks you picked up every week were just phenomenal. And they didn't have time to name every single one of them. You know, it's like cat memes. There's just too many of them. I didn't mean there's really too many. Sorry. It looks like, so if I'm correct, this gets out at, it's now 12:05, and this gets out at 12:20. So I have like 15 minutes left. Can cover anything. But let me look over the list of topics we have left. And I fear that I'm not going to get to internationalization, which is fine because I really know nothing about it. During the break, I snuck over to the Sphinx website, and in fact, I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll learn about internationalization in 60 seconds. And then I'll include a little bit about it at the end. And when I went and looked up internationalization, this is the first thing I saw, which is like one set of text files, another set of text files, and 3 databases with the girl from XKCD like bodily entering the database like it's the movie Tron or something. And I looked at that, and I knew immediately that I was not going to be giving you an off-the-cuff impromptu guide to internationalization. I will just point out that Sphinx Home documentation, they have a whole section on internationalization. And I'm willing later in the conference to get together in an open space with any of you guys to experiment with it, work it out, help you through any errors, because let me go ahead and say, at the end of the tutorial, I'm going to throw my email address up on the screen, because to me, when you choose to support PyCon by paying for a tutorial, which most people who come to PyCon don't do, I think you deserve more than just me giving it my 3 hours and then disappearing. I do this so that I create more people that are awesome at doing Python, that are awesome at doing documentation, whether you're documenting a Python project or not. The point of PyCon is for all of us to be more awesome. The point of PyCon is for all of us to bring whatever skills we have and try to send as many people away with those same skills as possible. And so, to me, I am fine with, and I want you guys not to think of me as that guy that you got 3 hours of my time and then I never was willing to talk to you again because it was off the clock. I want to help make you if things I've shown you aren't working, if you're trying to hit part of the Sphinx project and it's not making any sense and you want the opinion of someone who has more experience with Sphinx and might be able to help you get it working, talk to me in the hall, send me an email, because I don't want to have shown you some stuff and then have you go away and it always breaks when you try it. If what you get here isn't quite enough for you to get Sphinx working, just contact me later, ask me to get together with you on a feature I wasn't familiar with, because it will both let me help you finish getting what you intended to get from this tutorial, and of course it will help me feed that material back in the next year. So in the time that we have left, I want to talk a little bit about testing. If we now your guide by this point, if I recall, has several snippets of code inside of it if you've been adding more or less the sections as I've outlined them. If any of you guys, how many of you used doctest before in other environments? There is a very simple way in Sphinx to have it try running all of your code that's hidden inside of your file in those little snippets. It'll try running that Python and tell you whether it really produces the output that you promised it would. So to test that, we're going to make another visit to our favorite conf file. And if you go to, let's see, you're going to have to do two things. You're going to have to go to your favorite feature in conf.py, that extensions list you've been using, and add what I believe for the day is one last extension, sphinx.ext.doctest. And then I found it was helpful to also add to the path that doctest uses when trying to import your module that same directory that you've already added to sys.path. So I just said doctest, look in the same directory for the triangles package that I named as the first member of sys.path. So everybody, quickly add that to extensions, add that doctest path. I'll give you like 30 seconds, so type quickly. Oh, good. I had you answer yes to that? Oh, that's awesome. I should double check that list of instructions next time because I keep forgetting which modules I included. And now let me get, and actually I was trying to hurry you so that I could move away from this screen. Let me just, of course this invalidates my copy of the file, but that's fine. Oh no, I can put it in a comment. Get that added to your conf file, and then go over to your documentation directory right now, and don't try to fix it yet. Do a single run of Sphinx build -b doctest space, I didn't come up with this, test-output, and see what happens. If you get a problem like cannot find module doc test or something, I'll probably have to come around and help you when we're done with the tutorial. Did some of you guys get what actually looks like quotes from your documentation, but with errors in them? All right, remember the rule? When you see a bunch of errors, where do you go? To the first one. Go to the top. So 30 seconds to get your tests running. Go! All right, time is up. The reason I only gave you a few seconds is because when I did it, the problem was that it's that there's no import statement in the file. Like I went up to the top error and basically what it did is it went into guide.rst. It started at the very top and read through, and it got to this line, and it's just, for each file, it starts a fresh Python shell, and it tries running this line, and the error was, can't find triangle. And so what did I do? I went in, and I started it with from triangles.shape, import triangle, and suddenly all the tests passed but one. It turns out that t.perimeter was returning a float, and in the initial way I had you guys type the example, just making it up off the cuff, I thought that it wouldn't have the .0 on the end. So I found that with those two simple changes, adding the import statement so that triangle is actually defined when you try to use it, and then fixing a slight textual difference in a value that was being printed out, I found that the tests were passing, but you guys might find you're in deeper problems than that, depending on how well you did an admittedly very fast and hasty live copying job. The takeaway from this is simply, if you want to hand out documentation that you know works, if you want to hand out examples that you're sure are still working, because actually, for me, the problem isn't that I tend to write broken examples to begin with, though, as I proved with the 15 versus 15.0 issue, I'm quite capable of that. But usually my problem is that an example that was perfectly good in version 1 of the software and worked really well in version 2 of the software breaks in version 3 because of some subtle difference, and I forget to go reread all of my documentation before release. Thanks to having a tool like this doc test module, I can just run all of my docs against the newest version of the software with all the new bells and whistles and see whether the output is exactly textually the same, or whether there are bugs that now throw errors that I need to fix, or whether there are slight differences, functions named differently, options that have different defaults that I need to go in and adjust. And what comes out is documentation that I can give to users in confidence, knowing that it's going to work well. I won't have you type this, but I will note that, and let's see, is this in the stage, let's see, is this in this version of the guide? I remember where it is. It's in the tutorial. We're running low on time, so I was going to put up a tutorial and have you guys type it in, but that's cruel. Why not? It's late in the day. Why not just show you what would happen if you typed it? Right here, I have the triangles tutorial, a third document that I added, and it has a section called test code I didn't have to put chevrons in front of it. I didn't have to do anything funky except indent it. It's a file like you would put in a .py file. It's a file full of code to run. And then I have a little section called test output that is just this print statement's output, this print statement's output, and so forth. Because sometimes the doc test format interleaving input and output makes sense, but if you have like functions and loops, that's so ugly. Chevron, 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 dot, 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 chevron, and it's hard to edit the code that way because you often have to change chevrons to dots as you indent and unindent stuff. And this is a neat thing that Sphinx recently started. Earlier versions didn't have this, but this is also picked up by their special doc test runner and lets you generate tutorial information that looks like this file here on the left, where it shows the program, and then it shows the output, and even though it's not a normal doc test, it'll still get run, still get tested, you'll still be able to keep it up to date. One more feature that I won't make you go and type in manually is here, and again, I was going to send you off to go do this, but the challenge here would have been your index at the moment, if you go take a look at it, probably has the is similar function, probably has further down, if you scroll, the triangle module and the triangle class, but it doesn't have an entry for bad, poetry, or poetry, bad, or pedantry, or perimeter, or useless programs, or Pythagoras. And these are manual index entries. They're index entries that you can go and add by hand. And again, we are moving at this point very far from what, remember I told you that restructured text kind of starts wandering from how any reasonable person would format a paragraph in an email message to very specialized directives that you really get into when you become a power user. I don't have any index entries in the tutorial. I'm looking for the word index here. But what I did is in the guide, I added an index entry for the word perimeter right here above the section where I talk about it. That then shows up as a clickable link right here in the index. Here, right before that horrible little poem about math, which, by the way, the correct way to format that, I forgot to say that, is if you looked in the docs, by putting pipe characters at the beginning of the line, the indentation becomes significant and you can format text so that it lines up with the number of spaces you've added in front of it. Right above that, I both said pair, poetry, semicolon, bad, and pair means both put it under bad things, poetry, and index it under poetry that is bad, and that's a fun way to quickly make something show up whichever term of a two-term concept someone might look the concept up by in the index. And finally, I created a single entry, because this mentions Pythagoras, for Pythagoras, and so that appeared there as well. Again, the docs on this are great. It's a simple concept. You just go through and add more ugliness to your file, and boom, it has like all these index entries. These days, who uses an index? I mean, almost everyone I know always hits the search bar if it's there, but if you're into awesome indexes, and again, indexes are fun places to hide like inside jokes. In another famous formatting system called TeX or LaTeX that Donald Knuth, the famous math and computer science professor, wrote, I noted once when reading the source code of the book, which he put online, that he talks about how difficult it is to correctly format the lines on a paragraph if the paragraph lasts like 5 or 6 pages. That's what he says in the text of the book, but then I notice he had the directive to create an index entry for Joyce, James, an author who famous for paragraphs that are too long. So indexes are a fun, or use them for humor. You know, they're a fun place to just put fun concepts. And finally, 3 more quick things. Do you keep your documentation in a separate repository? The advantage is the docs people can commit and the program people can commit separately and without getting tangled. But the problem is that if I want to go look at the code and docs that belonged together a year ago, I have to look for commits at around the same date. If you keep them in the same source code repository, their histories march forward in unison, or actually in my repositories, the docs are usually a little bit behind, but in theory, they march forward, because usually I commit to the code, then remember I've got to go update the docs. They march forward together. I actually usually, instead of having a docs directory and then a code directory, I move the restructured text source inside my package and ship it with the package. I kind of like that if someone just pip installs my package and look in at the documentation, there'll be a doc directory in there with just the text of the .rst files, because again, it's readable on its own. They can look through it and in plain text read the documentation with some weird little colons here and there of my product. There are other formats. Again, just type the make command or Sphinx build and look at all those options it prints out. And I've actually only ever used the LaTeX output to produce PDF and the HTML output, but there are other formats, including some pure data formats for import into other documentation systems. Someone earlier, I think, asked about EPUB. I won't make any guesses about that because I've never used it, but it'd be fun to watch if you tried it so I could see how that process works. There is a really cool website called Read the Docs. How many have been reading documentation on that recently? Invented by a Python guy. It's free. If your project is in a public source code repository, like on GitHub or on Bitbucket, you can create a free account on Read the Docs, create the URL name for where you want your docs to live, and you just give it the repository address. And it regularly goes and checks to make sure it's pulled an up-to-date copy, builds it with Sphinx, and hosts it for you without you having to do anything. It's a free hosting service for open source documentation. And finally, I want to mention that you noticed here that as we went through, I wound up creating 3 different files: tutorial, guide, and API is what I call them. And a lot of projects have roughly that same structure. Django's structure is very similar. The Sphinx project's documentation is very similar. And I find it a really, really neat way to kind of cover all the bases when writing documentation. The tutorial is a quick example that gets you up and running and doing something cool. I love it, in fact, when people put that, cut and paste that into their documentation on PyPy, the Python package index, because so often I'm interested in a package, I go, and it just says what it does. No picture whatsoever of what this is going to look like in my code and whether it's easy to use. Tutorial should just come immediately up and running. Import triangle, let's create a triangle, look what we can do with it. A tutorial is sort of designed to just kind of hook the person by showing, here's what this thing does. Here's an example of how it works. It's for the complete newcomer, and it shows them. When you stare at API docs, it's often not obvious what to instantiate first. It's often not clear which methods you might need to call before other methods start working. The tutorial lets you kind of put together the smallest possible piece of working code so that people, again, have a working example to start making little baby steps from. Then, and here you guys created several sections of this document, I think of the guide as kind of the central pillar of the documentation that you write. Guides, to me, tackle particular topics. How to use your library to do one thing, how to use your package to do another. And what they do is get a single topic and pull together into a brief or long discussion all of the classes, methods, and techniques that you'd use to accomplish something, and showing you how your Python program would pull together a few methods or several methods, a few classes or several, in order to get something working. Because again, staring at an API doc, alphabetical order, all 35 methods on a class, it's often not at all possible to kind of guess, what am I supposed to call here? Turns out all you need to do is instantiate it, call number 20, and then call number 10. But it's often very hard to tell, and the guide tackling one topic after another can kind of bring together working pieces to show how you build solutions out of the little callables inside of your API. And then finally, the bare bones, most bottom level reference is your, whether it's in one file or many, your API. And it finally gets down to the nitty gritty. This class has these methods. This class has these methods. This module defines these constants and these functions in this class. It supports a quite different use case. You hit the API docs typically, or at least only as a last resort. You typically don't hit the API docs if you want to accomplish something. You hit the API docs because you're reading existing code and you come across a method you're not familiar with. And you know the name of the method you want. You know the name of the class, and you're wanting to go right in the docs to where it tells you, no nonsense, what exactly does this method do? We only in these docs created a few hyperlinks, but I encourage you to, in the tutorial, frequently as you show 2 or 3 simple things that you do in the tutorial, mention and hyperlink to the sections in the guide that explain those at greater length. So when someone hits your tutorial, takes 3 minutes to read it and go, that's it. That's what I need to do to this HTML file I'm downloading. You've mentioned what section of the guide will explain all of the options that can be used when doing that. In the guide, restructured text helps you. If you let restructured text know, if you let Sphinx know that you're naming classes and methods, it'll provide the hyperlinks into the API docs. So if going through the guide, I'm like, oh, this is exactly what I need. Yeah, but that's not the format of file I have. I wonder if there's an option on this that controls that. I can click through to the full description of every dang option and keyword argument on that method to see if there's a way that I can get accomplished what I need to complete. The place where hyperlinks tend to need to be abundant but people leave them out is going backwards from the API into your guide material. Because again, people do sometimes leave out the jump that lets you go from tutorial to guide, but it's kind of an obvious thing to think of because you know your tutorial audience and you know they need help getting further into your documentation. Again, the references just happen automatically thanks to the magic of Sphinx for jumping from the guide to where parts of the API are described in the API docs. But what I encourage you to think about is if someone who's not really familiar with your API is having to edit some code they've inherited from someone else that uses your product, they're going to be staring at this code, staring at a method, and they're not going to get why it's being called or what it's doing. They're not only going to need to jump into the API docs and see is similar. It's going to be really helpful if when you describe is similar, your last sentence says, this is one of several basic geometric properties that you can read off of a triangle that are described in the section, hyperlink to computing the perimeter or a larger section on geometric properties that might actually have diagrams. It's fairly, think of it, if we were really documenting a triangle module, we'd be using, look in the docs, Sphinx has a little ... space image : and you put the JPEG's name or whatever, and can have images in your doc. You don't tend to throw those into the API docs. Some people do, but they're more often the big pretty pictures of what a triangle looks like, how we measure the different parts, are typically put in the guide and maybe in the tutorial as well, and that person staring at the method in the API is similar. What does that look like? Because if they're not familiar with the concept, it can be a subtle one. And when you're writing the API, think about giving the people some escape routes out from this very, very specific method into a wider piece of documentation that shows a working example, that gives more context, that shows where this method fits in the sequence of reasonable operations you might want to do to one of your objects. So, I hope that this tutorial has helped get you started with obviously the mechanics of starting a Sphinx project, writing some documentation. I hope that it's helped show you a lot of the things that aren't very obvious from just trying to look over its own documentation, showed you, much like a guide doc, to kind of how to put them together into a working system. But I also hope that the structure of what I had you type, this idea of a guide that's more kind of a friendly discussion, sitting next to the separate treatment of your API that's just the bare bones list of every single call that it supports, I hope that that's given you a helpful way to think about the different ways that the complete novice, that the person trying to accomplish something, and that the person trying to read old code of their own or someone else's, the different paths into all of this information that your readers are going to need. So I promised I would put out my email address. I'll put it right here. Contact me later if you have questions, implementation details you need to know about, stuff you hope you learned here and didn't. I hope you all learned useful things, and most of all, I hope that you're inspired to know that if you want to go out and create awesome documentation for people, if you want happy users, if you want to help other people in your organization, I hope that this has given you the tools to do it. Thank you very much.